In.
Let me check.
Oh, we're live. We're live. Hello. Happy Independence Day to all the Americans, including my guest, Alexander. It's a big day for you guys. Your country turns how many years old today?
If I'm being honest, I don't know off the top of my head. I have to look it up.
It's got to be close to, well, I think in a couple years, you guys are celebrating 250, right? So, I mean,
Let's see, 247.
Yeah, so 240, no, it'd be 248, right?
Let's see.
Anyway, it's old. Older than mine. Like my country is 1867. I'm just going to live with All right. So yeah, for all the Americans, a happy Independence Day. We got our buddy Connor from Montenegro. Chernogoria. That's what they call it there. I've been to Montenegro. They call it Chernogoria, which means Black Mountain, which means Montenegro. A lot of people don't know that.
I went to Montenegro once.
Montenegro. What were you doing in Montenegro?
It was part of a cruise, so I guess I didn't really go, but I was there for a day.
You stopped in Budva, I'm guessing?
Yeah.
It's interesting. You go to Budva, you hear a whole bunch of talk in Russian, like lots of mafia there. You got these mafiosos with their beautiful wives, and
Yeah.
It's an interesting place.
As part of our excursion, they took us to various Orthodox and Catholic churches too, and the tour guide was trying to explain the differences between Orthodoxy and Catholicism. And I was like,
sir, KOTOR. KOTOR is interesting because that's like the dividing line where the Orthodox churches stop and the Catholic churches start. That's part of the border, the ecclesiastical border. All right, so yes, we got our good buddy Alexander. He you can find him on X. His account is called Papist Reply Guy, and on YouTube, more importantly on YouTube, Spoken Through Leo is his YouTube channel, and he's got he's just starting out, and the thing I really like about this guy, I'll tell you what, I'm just so impressed by him, is there's a drum that I've been beating forever, and it's to use primary sources. And so far, I think Alexander is my only convert to this methodology. So we'll talk about that in a bit. But first, I'm going to ask the question that I always ask my new guests. How did you come to know the Lord Jesus Christ and end up in the church that you're in?
Yeah, okay. That's a great question. So I was actually born Catholic. I was baptized Catholic, raised Catholic. So I guess it's kind of rare because most of the people you see in this space are usually like converts of some form. Though I guess you said you were raised Catholic as well. So I guess we have that in common. So my mom is, she's Puerto Rican. So it's just, you have to baptize your baby Catholic or else, you lose your Hispanic card. But my dad was always a Protestant. So growing up, even though I was raised Catholic, I'd come back from church, whatever, CCD, whatever, catechism classes. And I'd be like, oh yeah, they teach us X, Y, and Z. And my dad would be like, well, that's fake. I'm Presbyterian. And then he'd explain, kind of his position. So for example, I came home one day, I'm like, oh, they told us about the Eucharist. And, my little child brain was blown. And I'm like, yo, Eucharist. And my dad just, was saying, nope, it's symbolic. That's not what it's about. And then, I was just a little kid and I'm like, well, I trust my dad, so I'm just going to believe that. So I was kind of weirdly catechized. And then my mom as well, she's Gen X. So she was in that generation that really wasn't catechized at all. So she didn't necessarily know how to reply to my dad and would often just be like, I guess that's right. So she would often be, holding a Protestant view materially, even though she didn't know she was. So over time, I think in eighth or ninth grade, I decided to be an atheist just because that was the edgy thing to do at the time. This was kind of like in the waning years of the new atheist movement. So this was back in
Um,
like 2012. So like this was like at the end of it. So I'm like, okay,
yeah,
I'm gonna be.
Christopher Hitchens was dead by then, I think, right?
Yeah. I think he died maybe a year or two prior. I don't remember, but it was the tail end of it. So I'm like, I guess I'm an atheist, but I really rapidly over the course of maybe a year or two just was like, I can't square atheism with the way I view the world, because I think I talked about this a bit on my stream with Bellarmine a while ago. I was always kind of politically conservative, and at some point in high school, I read Russell Kirk. And one of Russell Kirk's big things is the existence of a transcendental objective moral order. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's how I view the world. There's objectively good things and objectively bad things, and we need to conserve the good things. So after reading that, I was always really drawn into the whole moral argument for the existence of God. So after that, I kind of became like a therapeutic deist, because I'm like, well, I can't really maintain, like, I just didn't look into Christianity really at that point. My parents didn't, like, because after I was confirmed, because it was still done like really late where I was. So it's not like here in Denver now where they actually did align it with First Communion, so you get it at age 7. I did it in like 8th grade. So my mom's rule was always get confirmed, and then you don't have to go to church. Like, I won't make you go to church anymore. So I obviously
Wow.
took advantage of that, and I just stopped going. And there's a redemption arc though. Like, the whole family is Catholic and good now. But
Is your
anyway,
dad Catholic too?
yeah, he is.
My dad is still a Protestant, but
Okay.
yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, let's hear the redemption arc though.
Yeah. So long story short, I kind of reasoned my way out of atheism, and I can get to like a generic theism. And then I think I stumbled across William Lane Craig as part of this whole like arc. And obviously he has various lectures on the historicity of the resurrection. I bought a couple books to that subject. I even got one relatively recently by Brant Petrie, The Case for Jesus. That one's really short, but it's actually pretty good.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Oh, you have it on hand?
You mean this book right here?
How do you always have like people's books on hand?
I do a lot of reading. I read about 50 books a year.
Yeah. So I ended up reading that book. Well, I didn't read that book at the time. This was later. But I read various books on the resurrection. And I kind of was like in a weird position because I agreed with the Catholic Church on moral theology. So like if you asked me, hey, what's your position on contraception? I kind of came through reason against it. They're like, hey, what's your position on gay marriage, homosexuality, abortion? I was holding all those positions, and I'd come to this conclusion that God is real, that God is one. So there's only one God, monotheism. And I was even coming to this weird conclusion that not only the historicity of Jesus, but the historicity of his resurrection is at least plausible. And I remember, so my first year was in college, was at American University. I still continued my general non-religiousness there. But then I got to Colorado State University, which is where I finished my undergrad. And it was just interesting because I remember encountering a couple focus missionaries. And a lot of people like to clown on focus missionaries online, but the focus missionaries we had were really good, as well as the whole like campus Catholic group was also really good. And then I also met a friend who's now my brother-in-law, who was Eastern Orthodox. And at this point, I'd been kind of researching the various denominations.
Who was or still is, or is that part of the story?
He is now. He wasn't then.
Oh, okay.
Because long story short, I married his sister. I think I talked about this a little bit on my stream. But anyway,
yeah. Oh, by the way, that stream I was supposed to be on, but due to a scheduling thing, I couldn't be on it. So
okay. Well, you got like a private stream.
Yeah. I said, hey, you want to do one just with me? And he was more than happy to oblige. And yeah, that video has almost 2,000 views. But it's your story. We'll get that to your story.
So I'm talking with all these focus missionaries that obviously want me to come back to Catholicism, because when they first encountered me, they're used to like, because they're like, hey, because they had nuns out on the plaza and everything. So obviously I'm going to go talk to the nuns because you don't see that very often, and talk to the missionaries. And they're like, hey, just come to church with us. I'm like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I believe that. I'm a former Catholic. And they're like, oh, former Catholic. So they assume that like most former Catholics, and this is probably true, fell away to some sort of like liberal inclination. But so they're going through all these things like, oh, well, like abortion, is that what's like scandalizing you? I'm like, no. And they go through this list and they're like, this is weird. This guy's weird. Like, because he agrees with us on all these topics that we usually have to debate college students on. And then my Eastern Orthodox friend was like, dude, just go to church. And at this point, I had been kind of like behind the scenes looking at Christianity again. And I had already kind of ruled out the low church Protestantism that my dad grew up in, just because like, I think I'd already read Ignatius of Antioch, just because I was looking into it. And I'm like, okay, this doesn't get you to Catholicism, but it gets you to the monoepiscopacy. It gets you to a certain real presence in the Eucharist above, mere symbolism. So like I was already at a point where I'm like, okay, I'm probably going to go, some sort of high church Protestant Catholic. And then Orthodoxy was not on my radar. But when I knew it existed, but it wasn't like something I was discerning. And then when I met this guy, it obviously started to be on my radar because I'm like, okay, now I have to consider this, third thing. So I started attending the Catholic Church, but I wasn't like in it yet. Like I was still like researching all the other things. I also had another friend, a second guy who I met. This is through political stuff on campus. He was also Orthodox. He was a Protestant Orthodox convert. So I would like attend the Antiochian church with him, especially that winter. But, long story short, what really kind of got me out of this intellectual mind of things, because at this point it was entirely an intellectual journey, was I'm just like, I just need to start actually having a prayer life. So I started, going through like, I'm like, okay, the Eastern Orthodox guys always talk about the Jesus prayer. So I started doing that. That's easy. You don't need any special equipment to do that. I had a rosary. So I did some research and started praying the rosary. And, long story short, even though I'd intellectually kind of moved into the Catholic direction just by, reading the apologetics. And at this point, it was entirely pop apologetics. So, I'm reading Catholic Answers. I'm reading, like ancient faith stuff. I think I found some of Dom Chapman's work actually. So this is, I guess, not pop, but like I found some of it free online. I forget what website it was on. I think it was biblicalcatholic.com, which I don't think exists anymore, but they had like his early papacy book on there. So I read that. But long story short, like I was already intellectually leaning in that direction. But I didn't actually take the full leap of faith until I started actually, unsurprisingly practicing it, praying the rosary, the Jesus prayer, and actually, getting a relationship with Jesus, using God's grace to, shed the various, sinful inclinations that I had been engaging in up to that point in my life. And so that's kind of the long story as to how I became Catholic. And then as for the mini redemption arc for my family, so what happened with that is after I became Catholic, I started coming home and just talking about what the Catholic Church teaches. And my parents were weirded out that I became Catholic because they never expected that. They expected that I would stay like deist or whatever. So I'm coming home and I'm just like, oh yeah, Catholic Church teaches X, Y, and Z. My dad would be like, oh, well, that's dumb. And I'd be like, okay, well, here's why you're wrong. And then it's just like the guy thing, the guy banter. So I just start being like, hi heretic, like stuff like that, just like, poking fun at each other. And then he wanted to disprove me on the Eucharist. So he went out and started researching it. And then like a year and a half later, because he was still going to mass every Sunday with my mom, because my mom would always go to the church and he would just go with her because, he had that kind of Protestant, like, oh, it doesn't matter as long as you like kind of like a quasi branch theory. Like he had a more positive opinion of Catholicism than a lot of Protestants. So he still thought it was like an acceptable form of worship. So he would just go with my mom and that would be what he did on Sunday. And he did that for 18 years. Maybe even longer, maybe it was like 20 years. So anyway, long story short, about a year and a half after I became Catholic, he started he just kept trying to look into it to debunk me. And one day at mass, the deacon made an announcement about RCIA starting, and he looks at my mom and says, I needed to contact him. And my mom just, he didn't tell her anything. And she was just like, what do you mean you need to contact him? He's just like, I want to be Catholic. And she's just like, she was shocked. She had no idea he was looking into it.
He didn't have confirmation?
No, because he was Presbyterian. So he had to get confirmed through RCIA. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So at this point he was only like I guess he had a weird, his family was whatever's closest to the housist, but he mostly identified with Presbyterianism. And anyway, he ended up becoming Catholic at that point. So he went through RCIA and got confirmed about a year and a half after I did. And now they're really good. They'll be like, oh, it's Friday, can't eat meat. And like, they know all the teachings and stuff like that. So that's the redemption arc. And my sister is also a Catholic, so that's kind of my faith
But
journey as far as that is concerned.
is your sister practicing as well, or is
Yeah,
she?
she is.
Oh, wonderful.
She's actually she's a cantor at their church.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, wonderful. Oh, that's such a good story. That's such a good story. You had your like whole family story there. So your family start as kind of like a divided home with with a lot of laps there, laps Protestant, laps Catholic, and now you're all practicing Catholic. That's wonderful. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, I think my family needs that because my dad was like he went to church with us till we were like 12 or something, and then he stopped going, and then my sister stopped going pretty much as soon as she got married. And
Did she marry a Protestant?
yeah, but he converted for her.
Interesting.
Yeah, and now they don't go, neither him nor her. I mean, my mom still goes and I still go.
Yeah.
That's,
I mean, my sister never had a weird lapse arc like me. She's just a cradle Catholic, and then my mom, even though she wasn't fully catechized. So as I noted earlier, I'd come home and say, "Oh, Eucharist, yada yada." My dad said, "Oh no, that's not the Protestant position." And then she would side with my dad because she didn't know any better. The moment I started coming back, and I'm like, "Oh, here's what but she never doubted the Catholic Church. So when I came back, I'm like, the Catholic Church teaches X, Y, and Z. Here are the receipts. She's like, okay, I believe it. And like anyone who tried to debate her, she'd be like, nope, that's not what the church teaches. I don't care. So like she's actually kind of based in that way.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. So what made you start your YouTube channel? By the way, the YouTube channel, I said this at the beginning, I'll say it again. Spoken Through Leo. Go there and subscribe. It's a really good YouTube channel. Why do you start the YouTube channel, Alexander?
Yeah, so indirectly, I guess you have a role in that because I've been following like the apologetic stuff for a long time. So since like 2017 when I started reverting, and at that point it was all pop stuff. So just reading like Catholic Answers, Trent Horn, Why We're Catholic. Those are good books, but like they aren't primary sources and stuff. And then I kind of engaged in what Christian Wagner calls the YouTube apologetics and theology diet. So, I'd be watching, this is back when Reason and Theology was, because this was a couple years ago, Reason and Theology was still mostly interviews with stuff. And that actually has some good content. So I'd be watching, Reason and Theology, Eric Ibarra, your channel. I don't think Wagner was around yet, or if he was, I wasn't aware of it. And I think he may have still been Anglican at the time. So I wasn't watching his stuff yet. I started, at some point I found Pine Sap in there. So but even the pop apologetics guys, Heschmeyer, Horn, Aiken, stuff like that. And then I came across your video at some point with, I think it was the other Paul. And it was like our favorite primary sources. And I think that the two that stuck out with me were Pope St. Leo's letters, because you always like to cite that one. And the ecclesiastical, history of England. So Bede. And those were also the first two primary sources that I'm like, you know what? I'm going to grab these and just start reading this because at this point, Chapman can only get you so far. Now, secondary sources, I still read them. I still think that they're like useful, especially when it comes to learning various historical context. Like, for example, if I just read a primary source, sometimes it'll be referencing something that I have no idea what it is. So I have to go to Wikipedia or, go out and get another book on the era entirely to kind of figure out what's going on. But, I said, you know what, Alan and the other Paul are right that if I am engaging in apologetics, and I wasn't like making content at this point, but like, I'd encounter people and for whatever reason, I became known as the guy in the friend circle that like knew about theology just because, I was reading all these secondary sources. So like, I knew like I could point out like, oh yeah, church teaches X, Y, and Z, here's why. But I wouldn't always it wasn't like deep understanding, if that makes sense. And I'm like, if everyone is looking at me in this way, I kind of need to have a deep understanding. So I wanted to start reading primary sources because at this point I had read, Ignatius of Antioch. And I think that was like among the church fathers, that was basically it. And so I'm like, let's start reading these primary sources. So I got Pope St. Leo's letters. And this is actually why I named the channel Spoken Through Leo, just because reading these letters made me his fanboy. And in fact, the moment I finished these letters, I went out and bought I went to Etsy and got a nice little Pope St. Leo icon and put it up. Maybe
Wow.
I wish I brought it in here. But anyway, so basically I read Pope St. Leo's letters first, and then I read the ecclesiastical history of St. Bede, and then I just kept reading. So like one of the subjects that I'm really interested in is how the early church viewed divorce and remarriage. And the reason I got interested in that is because you obviously have Eric Ibarra talking about the papacy. You can find people like Christian Wagner talking about the filioque and all this other stuff, but there's not that many people talking about, for example, why does the church teach that marriage is indissoluble? How did that teaching develop? Did it develop? Because the Eastern Orthodox always claim their view is more patristic. Is that view actually patristic, or is it kind of something that was derived through Byzantine imperial policy? And I'm sure you have opinions on that as well. So then I'm like, okay, so I need to start reading these primary sources as well. So that's so basically what happened was the reason I made my channel is just because after, I don't know, but this is maybe 2 years or a year and a half of just reading all these primary sources. I'm like, honestly, I don't want to have like a super formal channel where I'm like trying to monetize it or whatever, but like, hey, I can just do streams and talk about interesting stuff I've read. And other people, if they find it interesting, can go read it themselves as well. So that's kind of why I started the channel.
Okay, yeah, no, because like I really like the I'm gonna play a clip. I showed this I showed this to you prior to our stream, but I'm just gonna play it. I'm just gonna add it right now.
Because every single source we're going to cite, every single one, literally everything I'm going to be quoting here is from before 979. I will not quote a single source after 979. I'm going to do my best not to quote any scholars. I'm going to do my best not to quote any apologists. We're going to stick to the original source work here and show that prior to 979, prior to 1066, and obviously 979, England was not Orthodox. It actually held to the Catholic faith. But again, this is claiming that he was made anointed king. So did Pope make him the literal successor in that sense? Probably not. Was it an anticipatory coronation? Again, probably not, because he had older brothers. Some historians, because I looked this up to see what the historical take on this is. So this is my one scholar site, so please forgive me.
Oh man, that was good. Oh, I just love that, because I mean, scholars, the idea that people quote them as authorities. I don't know. Have you ever binged into the scene of Christian versus Islamic apologetics?
Not too deeply, but like every time I've seen a debate with like a Muslim apologist, they're always just talking about what scholars say.
Yeah, that's all they
like. They'll be like, "Oh, scholars say early church didn't believe in the Trinity, therefore Islam is true."
Yeah,
or something like that.
Yeah, things like that, or didn't believe in the resurrection, or didn't believe that Jesus died, or something like that. It's horrific how much they rely, and it's tons of times they're even quoting the scholarship out of context. But since I don't waste my time, and most apologists don't waste your time reading that garbage, we can't expose them on it.
Mm-hmm.
They misquote the scriptures. We're going to call them out because we read that all the time.
Yeah.
Who's going to read people like E.P. Sanders and stuff? Like who's going to waste their time reading that crap?
Yeah. And like, just for this, like the kind of like the development of the marriage stuff, like that I've been reading, for example, you read a lot. And I would say that most of the scholars that make claims that to the effect of, oh, the early church allowed for divorce and remarriage, like one of the big contemporary ones is David Hunter, who's actually a relatively, good and well-respected scholar. I think he's one of the editors for the Catholic University Press, Church Father set. But they'll often just make, arguments from silence, arguments from inference, because the scholar wants something to be true. He wants a more liberal, theology on this topic for whatever reason. And then he comes to a church father and you read it, and the church father actually doesn't say what he's saying, but he makes some sort of argument from inference as to, oh, this is why this church father means something that he's not explicitly saying. So it's just one of those things where it's also important to just be well versed in the primary sources as well, to the level of that your education allows. Because like, I can't read Greek, for example, so I have to kind of rely on translations in that sense. So I guess in that way, I'm still relying on scholars and stuff. But still, if you know the primary source, you can just be like, oh, but like elsewhere, the church father says this, which directly contradicts that interpretation. So then you can kind of expose the agendas that people have as well.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of like, okay, if you read, like, for example, like I read a lot on the Crusades, and there's a primary source called Fulcher of Chartres for the First Crusade. He actually does the First Crusade and probably the first 25 years of the Crusader states, but he's got the First Crusade in there. And it says that the Crusaders killed 10,000 people in Jerusalem. Okay. Like as soon as they had taken the city, they took 10,000 people up to the Dome of the Rock. They called it Solomon's Temple in the Chronicle, and they beheaded them. 10,000. Oh, that's pretty gruesome, right? 10,000 people executed. But if you take a look at every time he cites a figure, it's always grossly inflated. He says the Crusader army at Constantinople had 600,000 people. Impossible. He said the Turkish army at the Battle of Dorylaeum was 360,000. He said a fortress in Antioch, the fortress, had 60,000 people in it. No, that's impossible. Those are by a magnitude of about 10. And so if you take a look, these people were executed inside the Dome of the Rock. I typed into Google the prayer capacity of Dome of the Rock, and only 1,500 people can pray in it. And keep in mind, the Crusaders, it needs room for the Crusaders to execute these people. So it's probably closer to 1,000 people that were executed there. But uh, but all people do is just quote the scholars who say, "Yep, 10,000 dead in Jerusalem. That's how many of the Crusaders killed." And if you read sources like Fulcher of Chartres, Robert the Monk, they allowed lots of Muslims to leave the city. In fact, Robert the Monk, he said the Muslims that survived, the Crusaders made them take out the bodies of the dead Muslims and bury them outside of the city. So, I mean, yeah, it's a completely different view than most people think. But
Yeah, and like if you just rely on the scholars, like the scholar will probably be doing something like he'll take that 10,000 estimate, but then he will cast doubt on the estimate of say 600,000 troops, but he doesn't count, apply that same sort of a standard to the 10,000. So then you have these weird lopsided estimates as to the size of the Crusaders as well as the people killed and stuff like that. Whereas if you read the primary sources like what you're doing and you critically walk through it, you'll just get a much more accurate representation of what probably happened. Because then you can apply the same standard across everything.
yeah, and when you read the primary sources too, it's just so easy. Like when you come across people who are quoting like scholars and quote minds and stuff, you can just blow them out of the water. I don't know if you ever saw the refutation that I did of John Fisher 2.0 and of Dr. Gavin Ortland's 5 arguments against the papacy. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, I looked that one up. Yeah.
Yeah, that one was that was so easy because we've actually I don't know about John, but I've read all the material.
Yes.
Like I'd read all that. He's like we quoted a lot of Pope Leo, and the thing is, I actually knew what book that Gavin Ortland was getting all this from, because like 2 weeks before that, he's like, "Oh, look at this! I'm reading Sitchinsky's book, The Papacy and the Orthodox," and that's actually a very bad book. You don't want to read that.
I agree. I've read it. But I personally feel as though he gives away a lot to the Catholic position anyway.
Yeah, I think well, in my opinion, not enough, but
Well, obviously not enough, but like for example, like when he's interpreting Matthew 16, he's just like, "Oh, yep, Peter's the rock. Like the Catholics are right on this," and he'll cite various local councils that are basically teaching the Catholic view on this. Like it's not as I haven't finished his Filioque work, but like I would say his Filioque work is worse.
I don't think either books are great. I mean, I think that was like his book on the Filioque was the first English, uh, was probably the first English work on it, at least in modern times. So that kind of became an unofficial standard. But now there's been some more works coming out. There's the Catholic, like you got Eric Ibarra has his book on the Filioque. You got Guang coming out on the Filioque. Christian Wagner's done amazing stuff on the Filioque.
Mhm. And
Uh,
Duang's book is good.
oh, is it out?
No, I helped edit parts of it. I'm not going to get into the contents, but it's good.
Okay. Okay. I was like, I didn't know it was out, but yeah, he may have sent you an advanced copy. Yeah, no,
And one of the things as well, like the main thing I use like secondary sources for now is to help find other primary sources I wouldn't have found on my own.
yeah, no, that's in my opinion the only good thing about secondary sources is that as long as they cite their sources. But yeah, no, like primary source, like for me, my favorite topic. Can you guess my favorite topic in apologetics?
In apologetics, like overall,
In terms of Catholics and in terms of Orthodox and Protestants.
Orthodox and Protestants,
Yeah.
I would assume it's like medieval era sort of. I don't know, because I know with the Orthodox, you always talk about the medieval era primary sources, so I would assume that is where you like to go.
Well, yeah, yes, and I read them, and like my favorite thing to look is the topic of Cesaro-papism. I love
Yeah,
that topic because it's such an ugly spot in church history, and the Catholics, we have the most immaculate track record of maybe the Orientals have us beat, but in terms of Eastern Orthodox, that they got Cesaro-papism all over, and pretty much to this day, to be honest. Uh,
yeah.
and the Protestants, they all started out like that.
I
Like,
mean, maybe we would have I guess it depends how you define better track record because the Catholic Church has a very good track record of not only being independent of the state like the Orientals, but even subjecting the state to itself.
yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, in in like around the time of, well, as you talked about in your in your video with the Pope choosing the King of England.
Yes.
This is even with the undivided church in the the 8 or
Yeah, the
900s.
900s. And it's one of those things where, like, even if you want to be like the scholars who kind of doubt the historicity of that event, it's one of those things where you have an English writer at the time who thought it happened and thought it was significant and thought it added something to Alfred's claim. So you have an English writer at the time basically stating, yeah, I think that the Pope has some sort of temporal authority over England, and that's a good thing. And that adds to Alfred's life as being one of the great kings. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, no, and I kind of liked how in your video you're like, oh, Alan Rule told me to read this one. You didn't need to give me a shout out, but it was kind of cool that you did. So yeah, no, that's a great book. I've got the Penguin edition.
Yeah, that's the one I was using.
Yeah, it's got like that, and I think a couple of his letters and things like that. It's a good. Yeah, it's got Asher's Chronicle, and it's got like a couple of letters, small things like that.
And it's cheap. It's $10. And like every time I meet anyone who's kind of interested in theology, I'm like, have you read this? And they're like, no. And I'm like, every person who speaks English and is a Christian should read it.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially like in the States, in Canada, like where like we're former colonies of England. So it's kind of like part of our spiritual heritage.
Yeah, and like people don't know this, but in America, even until like the 50s and 60s, it would be common for Americans to claim that we're like the real England or whatever. So
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah. Though I must admit, the only knowledge I have on that is a secondary source, and I'm forgetting the name of it. I think it's actually written by a guy. I think it's Kaufman or something. But um, I don't know if you guys know who Ed Dutton is, but Ed Dutton had a video actually on this a while ago, and I thought it was interesting. But yeah. Anyway, basically, there's like a kind of ethos in America that like, oh, we're like the actual, like we're like, if you take England's principles and apply it consistently and to its full effect, like we're the result, and therefore we're the true England. And that was common until about the 50s or so, which kind of makes sense because that's when like America stopped being so Anglo-dominated.
Yeah, like I think after World War II, like because prior to World War II, like England was the superpower, and like World War II transitioned it to America.
Yeah.
With the role you guys played both in Europe and in the Pacific. For some reason, like in all the books I read about World War II, I prefer to read the books about the war against Japan because I mean, I don't know if you know about this, but when America declared war on Japan after Pearl Harbor, basically Adolf Hitler. I'm trying to find my biography of Hitler by David Irving. I've got the David Irving one.
Okay.
Do you know who that is, by the way?
I do.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm not going to comment though.
I've got a ton of his books. He says that apparently Hitler is quoted as rejoicing, is like, haha, they're at war with our ally and Japan hasn't lost a war in 2,800 years or something, you know. Couple atomic bombs later, that was all overturned. But no, I'm a huge fan of World War II, especially Japan. You know, there's some great sea battles in I don't know if you know about the Battle of Leyte Gulf off the coast of the Philippines in October of 1944, the biggest naval battle in the history of the world.
Yeah, no, I like honestly, I find I've definitely probably read a little more about the European front, probably just because I'm a Hearts of Iron 4 fan and I like to play in Europe a little more. But I agree with you in the sense that like the Pacific front is definitely more underrated and it's like more variegated in a way because of like instead of just being a battle over a big landmass, it's like, you know, the whole island hopping campaign is just really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So a bit off topic there.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite primary sources of all the ones you've read so far?
Yeah. So as I noted, my favorite one is probably Pope St. Leo's letters. That's probably my number one. And the reason that's my number one is because like if you read Pope St. Leo's letters, you aren't just getting, you know, papal primacy. You aren't just getting, you know, because that's what a lot of people think about with Pope St. Leo. They think, oh, I'm getting papal primacy, papal supremacy, but you'll be getting the filioque. He teaches that dogmatically.
He does.
You will get the real presence of the Eucharist. In my opinion, you'll get full-blown transubstantiation if you read it fairly and at face value. You'll get marital indissolubility. You know, he talks about marital indissolubility in there. He talks about various cases of divorce and remarriage. In fact, I could probably pull that up if you wanted to talk about his take on that. So that's probably my number one because, he even talks about rebaptism, like the rebaptism controversies that are happening today. He very explicitly states that, no, you should not rebaptize people if they are baptized by heretics. As long as, you know, it's considered valid, it's valid. All you have to do is, you know, do the laying of the hands, do confirmation, or in some cases, it's kind of disputed, like as to whether or not the laying on the hands back then was even confirmation. It would also sometimes just be profession of faith and stuff like that. So he comes out very strongly against rebaptism. And overall, he just very strongly, in my opinion, supports the Catholic position on almost everything. And also the whole dispute with the Monophysites is also really interesting because you can get the tome of St. Leo in there. So I would say one of my other favorite sources is also the one we were talking about, which would be Venerable Bede's work. Venerable Bede's work is also kind of similar to Pope St. Leo's work in that it's very broad. So this is towards the end of the patristic era. And I just find so like, again, I like that work because it, again, is very broad. It goes through papal primacy, it goes through Filioque, it goes through various
Which
basically
we
topics that,
believe, by the way.
yeah, which we believe. But like you just go through Venerable Bede, and you're like, okay, it's very clear, as I noted in that video, that England held to a sort of Catholic theology. It wasn't holding to a Protestant one. It wasn't holding to a Orthodox one in the early Middle Ages. It was clearly holding to, in late patristic era, it was clearly holding to Catholic stuff. So those are probably my 1 and 2. If I had to choose a number 3, it would probably be, let's see. I do like Clement of Rome, but I think that I do lean like I like Ignatius's letters, I think, a little more. Let's see. Clement of Alexandria is actually really underrated. I think that a lot of people seem to like kind of skip over him or not be super familiar with him, but his works are really interesting because he was one of the earliest kind of, I would say, rigorous theologians in the patristic era, in that he had a very formal education in that topic. You really start to see him start like working out things rigorously, point by point. Obviously, he's nothing like the later scholastics, but so I would say that's another primary source that I like. And honestly, it's one of those things where like you can even vary like what do you mean by primary source? Because if you just wait long enough, it becomes a primary source. So like if it comes to something like around the Vatican I era, I really like Hergenrother. Now that would be a secondary source insofar as you're trying to research the patristics, but it would be a primary source insofar as you're trying to interpret, say, Vatican I and how the the pro-papalist party was interpreting the prerogatives of the Bishop of Rome. So his book Anti-Janus, even though it's an apologetic which goes into a lot of the patristics, I actually thought it was most interesting when he's talking about the limits of the papacy and how he doesn't personally think that the Pope should work under a sort of autocratic point of view, even though he himself was rigorously defending infallibility and papal supremacy. He was saying, no, look, there are still checks on the papacy. He can't contradict scripture. He can't contradict the divine apostolic tradition. There's also obviously Bishop Gasser's Relatio.
That's a
and also, yeah. And there's also just like a lot of like magisterial documents, Unum Sanctum, like they aren't even always that long, that I just like to read as well, which could also be considered primary sources, again, just depending on whatever you're researching at the time.
So, so it's you brought up how it was the video that I did with the other Paul that sold you on the primary sources.
Yeah, it's what kind of first like, because I've been. It's not like I was like against primary sources, but you and he were just very forcefully like, look, if you want to get well versed in a topic, you need to at least have some familiarity with the primary sources. And you guys just made it easy. You listed the primary sources you liked. So I just looked at the ones you guys listed, the ones that interested me, which happened to be Pope St. Leo the Great and Bede at the time. And I was just like, you know what? I'm going to grab these primary sources and read them. And in fact, you even helped with that video that from the clip you posted, because you're the one who was just like, hey, like you should look into the life of Wilfrid. So I'm like, okay, I'll look into the life of Wilfrid. And I'm like, oh, that aligns with the video perfectly. So.
Yeah. Like, are you talking about Alfred or Wilfrid? Because those
Wilfrid.
Okay. Yeah. The one. Yeah. Because he talks about the same stuff as Bede.
Yes. Because he's one of Bede's sources.
Yeah. So. So by Stephen of Refon, also known as Adia Stephanus.
Yeah.
And then because like it just really bothers me with you've got all these people online saying that England was Orthodox before 1066, and I'm like, okay, have you read Bede? Well, no, I haven't. But here's a link to this Vladimir Moss article. Vladimir Moss, who said the Filioque was not in England before 1100.
It's just like, okay, look at the Synod of Whitby, done.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're thinking that's papal authority. You're thinking Synod of Hatfield, right?
Yes, Hatfield. Yes,
Hatfield.
You're correct.
And they haven't read any of that stuff. And they talk about all this BS, and they're like, oh, did you know that in 1049 or something, or 48, I can't remember, that the Reformed papacy excommunicated the Bishop of Santiago de Compostela? I'm like, you want me to let you in on a secret? There was no Bishop of Santiago de Compostela then. That's from the like 1095. So but no, but they've read. See, you can actually tell what. Eventually, over time, you can tell what secondary sources people read because of what errors they have. You know, it's like, oh, you have those errors. You've been reading this guy. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, it's not even reading. They just heard it from, say, Jay Dyer, and Jay Dyer read it somewhere. So it's like secondhand, errors that are coming through.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's like, well, the Chieti document is papally approved and admits that. I'm like, where does the Pope approve it? It's like, well, it's on the Vatican website. I'm like, no, it's
Yeah.
not. And the most they can do is it has a .va domain name. Well, that's not the Vatican website. Like technically in Canada, all of our domains end in .ca. That doesn't mean it's the government of Canada's website, you know?
Yeah.
So no, and yeah, they just hear this stuff from Jay Dyer. In fact, I think all of the converts Jay Dyer's made, the vast majority of them, if they'd actually read the stuff, the sources for 5 minutes, they'd essentially walk away from Jay Dyer's position because basically his only arguments are like his stuff against the papacy is bad. You know, he had that debate with Eric Ibarra.
Yeah. Well, it's because all he knows is Denny.
Yeah. Well, I
just finished Denny a couple weeks ago, actually.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I just decided to sit down and read it. It takes forever because it's very repetitive. The font's tiny, I was reading it on and off for like a year.
Well, and I think Denny, I'll admit this, I've not read it through, but I'll check some. He's willing to concede that certain people in, like, say, the 5th century believed in the papacy. Like, because as a Protestant, he's under no obligation to protect them.
Yeah, I think he even admits that Pope Leo was kind of
Pope Leo. He calls him like some like power hungry, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, he's like in love with power or something. I can't remember the exact words. It's been a long time, but that and a few other people like. That's why, if you notice that the Orthodox arguments start to get very bad, like post 500, for 2 reasons. One, they can no longer rely on Protestant material because they can just concede that, because a Protestant will just concede the papacy existed then.
Yeah.
But the second thing is the arguments for the papacy get so good in the 7th century. By the 7th century, the arguments for the papacy are amazing. Like, they're just astounding. And there's like, look, I've read Trulia's book, I've read Spencer's book, I've read Welton and stuff, and they essentially,
Welton's really bad.
Welton is really bad. Like, a lot of people.
I think I have Welton right here.
Oh,
See, he's finally the first time on this camera where a guest has a book that you don't have on hand.
Oh, I'm trying to find the Welton book. I was just using it a while ago, but I just can't find it for the life of me.
Well, I have it here just because I used it for my my stream on Lanoy.
Lanoy, oh man, that guy's annoying.
Yeah, and I debunk Lanoy just based because I literally looked up I found the primary source and read it. And then I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna do a stream on why he's wrong.
Yeah, no, and
because I don't think anyone has actually read it. Like, I don't know if you know this, Alan, but if you look at Lanoy, it's not even a list of fathers; it's largely a list of scholastics and medievals.
I've heard that. I've not actually read Lanoy.
So if you want to go to my, you can look at my stream later because I have like an Excel sheet where I have all the names of the people. So you can just kind of see who he lists where. And half of his list that say it's Peter's confession are post 800.
Really?
Yeah, and then like he lists like Thomas Aquinas as like having this like lower papacy opinion. I'm like, what is this guy talking about?
Yeah, it sounds like a piece of pseudo scholarship.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is because Lanoy was a Gallican, and he was he was forwarding the Gallican position. So the idea that this was some like Orthodox Catholic is not really correct either, because he was trying to prove, a form of conciliarism.
And I think Lanoy is the guy responsible for the 7 popes taught against the Immaculate Conception, or
Oh, I don't know about that because I only read the specific because he wrote a ton. And so I only read like a kind of like 15, 20 page long thing that he did on Peter the Rock, just because, when reading Welton, that's one of the first things that Welton brings up on page 22 of his book. So basically right after the intro. So that's kind of why I read that part of Lanoy, but I would not be surprised if he's responsible for that either.
Yeah, no, and as you know, our good brother in Christ, William Albrecht, is like the king of defending Catholic Mariology.
Yeah.
And he's written like a 45-page article refuting that the 7 popes who deny the Immaculate Conception. It's so bad. Like I've only looked at the ones for Pope Leo the Great.
Oh yeah, because they cite his tome, right?
They cite something from him, some quote from him.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, but what about all these other quotes about Mary? And yeah, no, it just really shallow stuff,
Yeah. I mean, Pope Leo definitely, like, again, just from reading and I think it's the same edition you have, the gray one. Like, he just has very, very clearly high Mariology. And it's one of those things where a lot of the time people will point to kind of like an obscure quote in a father that's not very clear. And then they'll say, okay, this is against the Immaculate Conception. But then you read, he believes in premise A, B, and C, which necessarily leads to the Immaculate Conception elsewhere. So by reading him in that way, you're introducing a contradiction. And like, it's one of those things where I think you should be hesitant to impute a contradiction on a church father without good evidence to the otherwise. Like, for example, with Augustine, we're kind of lucky in that he wrote retractions, so you can kind of see where he changed his mind.
Retractations.
Retractations, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because retractations actually has a really good refutation of the Protestant relying on the thief on the cross, and the retractation. I use Augustine's argument found, I believe it's in Retractations, where he talks about that. And yeah, I've never had a Protestant answer that objection.
Yeah.
So
Retractations, I guess, would also probably make the list for one of my favorite primary sources. I just found it really interesting.
Yeah, no. See, Augustine. As soon as I started getting really serious about my faith, like in terms of like actually learning about it, I'd always gone to church. But it was about 2010, and I'm like, okay, I need to read church fathers now. Because I had done a lot of Bible study. I'm like, okay, I need the church fathers. So I read the Apostolics, and I really started to read a lot of Augustine. Augustine, I went nuts on. But then, for some reason, I just stopped reading him because huge corpus of work, right? His book on the Trinity. I tried to read The City of God back in the day, and I stopped. I couldn't get through it. I might try to pick it up again, because like I know a lot more now, and I've done that with books that I used to think were over. The first time I tried to read the Alexiad by Anna Komnena, I couldn't get through it. Have you tried to read that one?
No, I haven't.
It's a biography of Alexius. You know who Alexius Comnenus is?
It's one of the emperors, isn't it?
Yeah, he was the one who appealed for the Crusades,
Yes.
uh, to the Pope for the Crusades. But so that's why I started to read it. But there's so much more about his life, and how his daughter's Anna Komnena, she writes the biography of him, and I love the way she writes. It's so entertaining, and she has she refers to her father there's as the high priest, you know, and like I like to say this for the people that see, no one studies the medieval church. That's especially the medieval East. Like they may study a bit of the medieval West, but I'm the only one who does the medieval East. That's why I was able to find that famous quote from Patriarch Anthony IV. Like no one
Yes.
knows about that stuff.
Yes.
Or
I've actually seen that one because I was talking with Pine Sap and he's like, Alan sent me this. Look. And I was like,
yeah, no, I got a ton of stuff. And there's a stuff where the emperor's arguing with the bishops and the emperor wins and makes it the dogma. No one knows about that, right? No one knows about that except me, because I've actually read the medieval sources.
yeah.
That source actually, I was we'll just leave this up here. Uh, that source, I actually it takes place with the death of Alexius Comnenus in 1118, and it goes all the way to 1207. But that covers 1204. That guy was a Greek in Constantinople during the sack. So back when I was doing all my Fourth Crusade research, I read the 3 Latin chronicles that are available in English, and that was the Greek chronicle I read. But of course, it includes a bunch of other stuff too. And I'm like, I got to read it all through, and that's where I get all this Cesaro-papism stuff. Because I mean, as soon as you know these arguments, they have absolutely nothing. Because one, they don't know about it, and two, they're under this false impression that their church has always been this kind of collegial conciliar. No, it hasn't been like that. I'm sorry. Uh, that's a modern thing, and it's barely a modern thing too. Like I did, you know what happened to the Tsar in from 1721 to 1917?
Well, from what I understand, so like you had the kind of patriarchate in Russia, and then the Tsar abolished it, and then it was reduced to like a kind of like council of elders sort of thing, and
Of
then
appointed
it was
laymen.
reestablished during the revolution, right?
Yeah. So like for 200 years, their church was run by like a synod of lay people appointed by a politician, appointed by another layman. So it's kind of like um uh, 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 you can ask people, is it orthodox for a church to be under a patriarch? And they'll say yes. Then you say, is it orthodox for a church to be under a synod of laymen appointed by other laymen who had abolished the patriarch? And they really start to cope at that point because they know where you're going, right?
Yeah. Well, unless they don't know about that period of history, in which case they don't know where you're going.
Yeah. And then of course it's like, well, due to extreme circumstances, but can you call yourself there were people in that 200-year period who were born and died and never saw the patriarch restored. And by the way, it got restored as a communist puppet, by the way. And so it got restored, but there's people who were born, lived, and died in that. Were they Orthodox? I mean, if it's not Orthodox to be under the Pope of Rome, is it Orthodox to be under a synod of lay people appointed by another layman?
Yeah, and it's even a little more interesting because if you think about it, a lot of their best dogmatic theology works kind of came out of the Russian church in that period. You know?
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, because that was like I think after Peter Mogila in that area was all Russian, right? You know,
Yes.
and now it's more
And
like
then you had it. What was his name? Was it Pomansky? I don't remember his name. I think Seraphim Rose may have been the translator, or maybe he wrote the foreword. But Orthodox Dogmatic Theology is the title of the book. That was a Russian production. And then you have another one I think of the same name, which was written in French that I haven't, because I can't read French. But that one also came out of Russia. William Albrecht kind of noted in his book on the canon, which is a really good book as well.
I haven't read that one.
Yeah, with Kappas. So they go through a lot of Slavic theologians. So is that kind of interesting? Because during this period, the Slavic theologians all rejected the Deuterocanon.
Really?
Yeah, so they make an argument that there's actually a really long tradition of rejecting the Deuterocanon in the Russian church at that time. Because they had a lot of Protestant influence and a lot of their dogmatic theology on that point. And even though they accept it now, it's still not uncommon to meet people that say that it's like secondary and not like inspired in the same way.
Because I have two Bibles in Russian. I'm trying to find my other Bible here. I guess I can't find it, but it's kind of like a Protestant Bible by Zondervan. But this is and that one has the 66 book canon, but this one is the synodal version that they read in the Orthodox Church. Like, look, Sirach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's weird because it's got like old. This is like the King James Bible of the Russian language. Like, it's got old words that like aren't used anymore or aren't used in conversation anymore. Like in Russian, if you're going to say because, you either say takak or patamushta. But in this, it's got this word ibo. And the word ibo means the same as takak or patamushta. It means because. And it's got all these old words that, like, if you take a look at how John 1 is translated, it looks really different than how it's done in the standard modern Protestant translation. But no, it's tough to it's an interesting book, but it does have the Deuterocanon.
That's cool.
Yeah, so now I don't know exactly when this was printed. I think it's a modern printing, but it's an older translation, so I don't know. Anyway, I can translate that later. But yeah, but that's interesting. So that there was like some ambiguity about those books.
Yeah. No, but yeah, like that point on the Russian church, that kind of being a recent example of Cesaro-papism is really interesting as well. And then I may be wrong because I've only read this online. I haven't actually looked into it. So you might know more about it because this is your wheelhouse. Is it true that the mayor of Istanbul has like a veto power over who becomes the next ecumenical patriarch? They just don't use it, but like they technically do? Or is that like just something polemical I saw on the internet?
Okay, I don't have primary sources on this right up front, but I believe the Turks. I don't know if the mayor of Istanbul has veto power. However, I know that they have a law saying that you have to be a Turkish citizen. So you can't have a monk from Mount Athos going there to be the patriarch. It's got to be a Turkish. And because of the laws that were passed against the Greeks in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and like the pogrom they had in the 1950s, a lot of Greeks have left Istanbul. There's only a few thousand left. So I don't know if you know about this, but in 1923 or 24, there's a big population transfer between the Greeks and the Turks. Like Turkey was like 20% Greek, and there were some Turks in Greece. So they're like, hey, how about you send those here and we'll send those here. Now, the people of Istanbul were exempt from that. It was people in Anatolia. the people in Istanbul and a couple islands were exempt, but all the ones in Anatolia, in Thrace, I think, in Trebizond, in Smyrna, like they all went to Greece, but the ones in Istanbul stayed. But basically, the Turkish Kemalist government passed a whole bunch of laws against them to make their life very bad. So a lot of them left voluntarily for Greece, for America, and then and so now there's only about 5,000 Greeks left in the entire country. In fact, when the Patriarch of Constantinople, he wanted to go to Trabzon on the Black Sea to like do a thing there. He had to get permission to use the Catholic Church there, because all the Greek churches in Anatolia have been converted into mosques or museums. So he had to use the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church allowed him to, because they're fairly friendly with him. Like I think there's only one Catholic church in that whole city. See, the thing though is, in Turkey, there's so few Catholics in Turkey, and you can say this about a lot of countries. In Turkey, in Morocco, and in countries like that, there are so few Catholics, but the few churches that they do have are beautiful, you know, because they're made during like the colonial period and stuff. So
Yeah.
so it's not modern stuff they're making there. It's old stuff that they have and they maintain. So like yeah, there's not a lot of Turkish Catholics out there, but the few that are, you know, get beautiful churches to do their stuff. They get like these French Gothic churches, and it's so nice, you know.
Yeah. So with only 5,000 Greeks, then does that mean that? So that means the pool is like relatively small that they can pull from.
Yeah, they got to be monastic. Now, I have heard somewhere that if there's no one left, they'd be willing. The Turks would be willing to give Greek citizenship to one to come take that position. I've heard that. I haven't confirmed that, or they'll just allow the office to expire.
That would actually be really interesting to see how they ecclesiologically would deal with that.
Or they could take the Patriarch and move him to Greece.
Yeah.
Because like I know they like to mock the Pope for say, oh, the Pope was in Avignon for 50 years or 60 or about 70 years actually. But for them, their patriarch from 1204, when the Latins occupied the city, was in Nicaea. So I mean, they have the same problem.
Yeah, because after the sack, because the Latin kingdom owned Constantinople, so they had like that little rump state.
Yeah, so they appointed a Latin patriarch of Constantinople, and the Greek sources actually refer to him as the patriarch. If you read that same source that I get the thing with the bishops fighting with the emperor, it actually talks about that as well. So that's interesting. It actually calls him the patriarch. They were like offended that he didn't have a beard and all that stuff.
So how did you get into the primary source stuff then? Because you said it was 2010. So like, what kind of convinced you to go that route versus just, you know, scholar maxing?
Well, in 2010, I don't think I decided to read a lot of Augustine. It's not like I had a primary source versus like secondary source. Well, I watched a lot of Islamic apologetics, and they're all scholars. They're entirely scholars. Then I realized that a lot of the Christians that debated the Muslims, they would, like James White, for example, he would debate against a Muslim. And he would chastise them for quoting scholars, and then he would go and debate a Catholic, and debate sometimes the same scholars that were quoted at him, like Raymond Brown. It's like, oh, Raymond Brown agrees that this verse doesn't do support purgatory, and it's like, you're kidding, right? You just gave Shabir Ali a bunch of crap for quoting him, and now you're quoting him against a Catholic. And he quoted Richard McBrien in some of his debates against a Catholic, and I'm like, McBrien, seriously? That modernist crank, and thankfully that's slowly going away in the Catholic Church, but and so, like, I saw a huge amount of that was part of it, and then I was talking about Saladin, the guy who fought against the Crusaders, the Kurdish commander. He I only learned about him through Thomas Madden's book, and it was actually an online a guy online who told me, he's like, "Oh yeah, I read the primary source, haha," the biography of Saladin, written by. There's a couple, but I think only one is in English. And so I think I started to read the primary sources for the Crusades, and it just branched out into everything else. Like for example, if you go online to 1peter5.com, I've got articles there. I've got an article on the Fourth Crusade. It is entirely primary sources. There's a couple secondary sources and scholarly quotes added. That's not from me. It's actually from Tim Flanders, the editor. Yeah, I got nothing against. I love Tim Flanders. He was on my channel not that long ago. I've had him on several times. Great guy. But I'm just saying, the few scholars that are quoted in there, it was him who added them. All the primary source stuff is mine. So so I remember him adding that, and like, I think and so that kind of branched out, because, like, it just makes sense if you want and Crusade reading. I realized, because I'd read scholars on the Crusade, that I got so much more out of the primary sources than I do reading the stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, if it's true for the Crusades, let's see if it's true elsewhere, and it is. That's why I was able to shred Gavin Ortland in his video where he has his 5 arguments against the papacy, and like in fact, I'll tell you the story about that. It was after a live stream, and John Fisher and I were talking, and we talked like well into the morning, and he's 3 time zones away from me. So and while we're chatting, he what was it? I'm trying to. While we're chatting, I get an alert because I subscribe, and I got, it's like Gavin Ortland just came out with a video, 5 arguments against the papacy, and I'm like, they're like, let's watch it, and so we watched this, and we're pretty much laughing the whole time at how bad it is, frankly, and then I wanted to go live right then. I'm like, let's refute him that this will look, and then John's like, no, let's take a couple days. We'll get all our sources together. And I'm like, okay, but I wanted to go live right then. I'm like,
that would have been really funny, actually.
In hindsight, I guess we should have, but he wanted to like take his time and make sure we had everything. Cause like, you've seen that one, like on Canon 28. It's like, well, it takes a while before he affirms it. And I'm like, he didn't affirm it. He annulled it. He annulled Canon 28 by Peter's authority.
And that's like what, letter 105 or something?
Yeah, to Pulcheria.
Yep. And he annuls it with the authority, under the authority of Peter.
Yeah, and you want to know something funny? If you read Michael Welton's book, it quotes the letter to Pulcheria for something else. It does not quote that portion. And then later, when Welton's talking about Canon 28, he doesn't mention Pulcheria. He doesn't mention Pope Leo annulling it. So, I mean, yeah, that's why Michael Welton is only good if you've never read anything. Like,
Yeah,
it's a
well,
very deceptive book.
and I think there's some debate as to whether he's read anything because, as you know, you had Wesley on your show. Wesley's been going through and he's finding a lot of places where Welton's misquoting not only primary but also secondary sources.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, yeah, no. In fact, I've been talking with Wesley about having him back. He just had a kid though, so his like they're fairly occupied with that. He actually, I think he lives, I think fairly close to where you. I don't know exactly where he lives.
He's in Missouri.
Okay, and that's
east, so that would be Central Time Zone, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. He's not in the Mountain Time Zone. The only Mountain Timers I've talked to are you, Pine Sap, and Kayla, the girl from Utah who's an ex-Mormon who became Catholic.
Yeah.
But it's really rare that I get to have a fellow Mountain Time Zone person on here. That's always a treat because it's almost always the coast, so like California, and it's like, okay, that's not that hard, it's only an hour. And then you got a ton in the east. A ton of them are in the Eastern Time Zone, like Hellermite is in the Eastern. There's the odd Central. But overall it's slim picking, you know, for the Mountain Time Zone.
Yeah. You know, another weird kind of niche interest I used to have actually is LDS sort of stuff. Like, I've read the Book of Mormon, I've read Doctrines and Covenants, I've read parts of Pearl of Great Price. Like, I've read a lot of their scriptures just because I wanted to go through it once. And it's pretty interesting. In fact, the Book of Mormon, for anyone who hasn't read it, I actually think poses a problem for the LDS, not just because of like the historical stuff that you're normally hearing, but I personally think that Joseph Smith was still probably Trinitarian when he wrote the Book of Mormon, and that the changes to their theology happened later in things like Doctrines and Covenants and Pearl of Great Price. Because if you read the Book of Mormon, he seems, maybe he's modalist at some points too, but he's not nearly as far off the rails as he gets later on.
That's
like I really do think that the Book of Mormon is almost just like DLC Christian content, and he hasn't strayed that far yet. Like, there's even parts in there where it's against polygamy.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because they don't allow polygamy until much later. I'm very underread on the Mormon stuff. Actually, well, I've read more than the average person. I've read, I started going through the Book of Mormon, but I didn't finish it. There's some LDS people, like on the block I'm on. There's kind of like some apartment buildings, and it must be owned by an LDS guy, because I run into their people. Like I run into them and we're chatting, and of course all of them are from Utah. You know, we always talk about basketball, you know, because they're all Jazz fans, and then we get to the faith stuff, and I've actually read a few of their books. I've not read their scriptures, but I've read a few of their books. I think I did actually read through the Book of Mormon, now that I think about it, but I did read Doctrine and Covenants.
Doctrines and Covenants is really where the meat of their theology comes from.
Yeah, that's what I think. That's where they do like polygamy and eternal marriage and all that stuff. Because the Book of Mormon's like fairly early, right? Yeah, it
was his first one.
The way, yeah, but yeah, the theology hadn't gone off the rails. Well, it had gone off the rails, but it hadn't gone as far as
I mean, because Book of Mormon, in my opinion, is just fan fiction. It's not like it's not, again, it's like, it's basically Protestant theology. Like you get into, say, oh, okay, so no baptism until the age of 9. Okay, that's not super abnormal. And then you get to Doctrines and Covenants and Pearl of Great Price, and it's just like, what is this guy saying?
And then baptism for the dead comes in.
Yeah. And also their app, I actually have their app on my phone. I must admit their app is like top tier. Like it's like the opposite of the Vatican website, which is like, okay, the more 1997 your church is, the more true it has to be.
So I got a question. How do you mind sharing what city you're in publicly, or
yeah, it doesn't matter to me, I guess. I live in Fort Collins.
Okay, so in Fort Collins, is there a strong Catholic scene there?
I would say relatively. So I go to a church that's very very active. I mean, if you go, okay, so you know the website reverentmass.com or whatever?
I've never heard of it.
Okay, so it's a place where you can look up like what are like theologically orthodox Catholic parishes. So when you're traveling, you know where to go. Their photo on that website is actually my church.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and like also like I don't everyone has seen my church, because if you ever look up the Latin Mass stuff and they always show that candlelit Mass, that's actually a Novus Ordo Mass. It's actually my church. So yeah, I live in Fort Collins, and it's really
Reverend Mass.
I think it's Reverend Mass.
Okay, you'll have to send it to me later. I can't find it, but
ReverendCatholicMass.com.
Oh, Reverend Catholic Mass.
Yeah. So, and you'll see that photo on the front page, and you'll recognize it because, like Matt Fradd, I think on one of his articles, he's like the beauty of the Latin Mass, and he used this photo, and I'm like, this is literally a Novus Ordo.
Oh, that isn't it. So that's your.
That's my church. Yeah. In fact, that would have been around 2017, 2018, based on who's in it. That would have been about when I'm like, yeah, I'm going Catholic. Like, so.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. And it's like, it does look like it's mainly in the States. Yeah, they don't have any in Canada.
True, it might be an only US thing.
But it's got some Africa stuff too.
Oh, you're right. I see that.
So I think it's one of those things where
I think you have to send it to them.
Yeah.
I've sent them stuff like when traveling. Like I'm like, oh, they don't have this Melkite church, so I sent them some stuff.
Okay, there's like I'm checking the places I go, like Great Falls, Montana, Columbia Falls, Montana, Missoula. I wonder if it's the St. John the Oh, it's not that main church. There's actually a beautiful church in Missoula. Have you ever been to Montana?
I've never been to Montana.
Oh, okay.
The closest I've been would be Cody, Wyoming.
Okay, I've never been to Wyoming, but I kind of wanted to go there because I'm kind of because I do a lot of reading in terms of history, outside of church history too. I just bought a biography of Mata Hari. That'll be interesting. But no, I know there's a book about Matthew Shepard. Remember Matthew Shepard, the guy who was killed because he was gay? I think he was actually from Fort Collins, or spent time in Fort Collins, but he was from Wyoming. And they found out he was not killed because he was gay. He was killed because he was a drug dealer, and he beat up. He got beat up by, he got killed by fellow drug dealers that were trying to steal the crystal meth he was dealing.
Yeah. Wait, what was his name?
It's Matthew Shepard. Oh, it's famous.
Looking this up.
Matthew
Fort Collins would be interesting. University. Okay, yeah. Just because I'm like, oh, that'd be.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess you're right. He was taken by. He was sent to our hospital, probably because our hospital is bigger than Laramie's.
Yeah, and so like the whole thing from like 1999 or 7, or I can't remember the exact year, until about 2015, it's like Matthew Shepard murdered because he was gay, and they would show this picture of him. It was almost an icon, and now it's kind of like Matthew Shepard, the drug dealer who and the two guys who killed him, apparently he had slept with one of them. Because apparently, and so like so much came out in terms of the story, and this guy wrote a book about it. His name is Stephen Jimenez, and then a lot of people were saying, "Oh, he's just a homophobe." Well, it turns out the guy who wrote the book is gay too, so they can't they can't pin that on him. So, but no, but no, like I love reading history outside of church history as well. That's why I just bought a biography of Mata Hari.
Yeah.
Who buys a Mata Hari biography? Do you know who that is, by the way?
No.
Oh, he was a spy who was executed in World War One. Yeah, no, it's
Do you have since you like reading history, probably one of the last things, because I have to go here in a minute, but like, have you read anything by, I think his name is Manchester?
Doesn't ring a bell. No.
Let me see if I can find it. Because my dad likes reading historical biographies. Yeah, William Manchester.
That's not English at all.
Yeah, he wrote a lot of biographies on, like, he wrote American Caesar.
I don't read a lot. I mean, I hope I don't offend you with this, but I don't read a lot of American history.
Yeah, well, he also has written stuff like he wrote The Last Lion, so he writes he actually writes a lot of World War II stuff.
Oh, really? Okay.
So you might like William Manchester, Last Lion, because he wrote like a 3-part biography on Winston Churchill, and then he also wrote American Caesar. So
Churchill. Interesting. I'll have to compare that to what David Irving says about Churchill.
Yeah,
yes, I read David Irving for everyone who's.
Do you recommend him? Like, is he actually like solid?
Yes, very solid. Okay. Yeah. Then there's this book I got. It was a biography of Tamerlane. Okay. And it's a long book, and it's a primary source. It's it's a guy who like Tamerlane was a Turkic Mongol warlord, but he had an Arab who served in his court who wrote this book. And because of this, he was with Tamerlane his whole life, and so he had an intimate knowledge of Tamerlane. So it's a great source. I've not read it yet. That's coming very soon on the list.
Cool.
Yeah. No, I'm unfamiliar with William Manchester, but no, I read a lot of like ancient Roman stuff, like Julius Caesar, Tacitus, Suetonius. That's great stuff. I've read, in fact, a good book that you guys should read is, and it's a primary source. It's only been in English for like 5 years. The Siege of Shkodra by Marin Barleti. It's an Albanian. It's the Sultan Mehmet the Conqueror, the same guy who took Constantinople, was trying to attack Rome, but he had to go through Albania first. And he went to war with Skanderbeg for a while. Then eventually he died of old age, and then he tries to siege Shkodra. And they hold him off until, I think, 1478, until they surrender under terms. But, oh, no, great biography.
And you said this guy was against Skanderbeg?
The Sultan was.
Yeah.
And this book is about the people who... Apparently, this guy, his first book was a biography of Skanderbeg. His second book was what happened after Skanderbeg died, the Siege of Shkodra. And,
okay, I'm going to add this to my list right now.
Yeah, and it's not expensive at all. In fact, let me Let me take a look how much it is on Amazon. Siege of Shkodra. Okay. It's $36 Canadian. I don't know how much that is American. Oh. Oh. His biography of Skanderbeg has just been translated.
Oh, really?
Yes. Oh, frick, it's 700 pages. Holy.
So it is $27 for the Skodra one.
Oh, that's not bad. That's not bad at all. Yeah, so pick this, a great read. And you probably been to Albania, right, on the cruise?
No, we didn't stop there. I
Well,
don't think.
yeah, that's true. In Albania, there are no big cities on the coast. It's the weirdest thing. Like, all the cities are inland.
Oh, okay, you're right. This is cool. Honestly, I'm kind of tempted by the Skanderbeg biography.
Like, it says it just got published in April. Wow, I'm how random it was that I looked that up. Yeah, because it's the same guy,
Translator.
Barletti. Well, I don't know if it's the same translator. Let me check if it's the same translator. David Hossafluke. Yes. Zachary Jones. Oh man. I'm excited. Oh man. Skanderbeg is one of the most underrated heroes of Christendom. No one knows about him.
No, I know about him. I'm a fanboy.
Oh, okay. Where did you learn about him?
I think I first learned about him when what's that YouTube channel, Ex Cathedra, that posts Catholic music? They posted a Skanderbeg song, and then I looked him up. And admittedly, I'm not an expert on him because my knowledge of him is just reading his Wikipedia. But yeah, no, I've been a fan of him ever since. And now that I know that there's a primary source biography of him, that's cool.
Yep, personal friend of his, Marin Barletti.
And then his story was kind of interesting because he was Orthodox for a while, then he became Muslim, and then he died a Catholic.
Well, he was recruited into the Dev Shirme.
Yeah.
So like a janissary, he was taken and like essentially force converted into Islam to be part of the Ottoman core, and then he abandoned. There are tons of examples of janissaries abandoning the Ottomans because it was such a brutal life. There's a book that I got that's written by a former janissary there. I don't know how accurate it is though, because it has weird things. It says the Muslims pray 7 times a day, which is not true. They pray 5 times. So yeah, but oh man, oh that's so great! I'm gonna read the Skanderbeg book. No, the first time I learned of Skanderbeg is 2014. I go to Albania. On the same trip, I actually went to Montenegro. Connor, I hope you're still listening here. So, and then the only Albanian I'd heard of is Enver Hoxha, who is the former communist dictator for most of the 20th century after World War II until about 1988 or 90. And so, and so that's the only guy I heard of. And like I'm talking to a guy, and everyone there is talking about Skanderbeg. He's like the hero of their nation who defended Albania against the Turkish invaders. And like the main square in Albania is in Tirana is Skanderbeg Square. There's a statue of him on a horse there, and then we're talking to this young guy who lives at the hotel. He's like, "Oh yeah," who works at the hotel, and it's like he's telling us about the country, and then it's like, "Oh yeah, you got to go to this city. That's where Skanderbeg's from." I'm like, "Who?" And the more I learned about Skanderbeg, the more impressed I was. I bought a biography of him as soon as I got home. Like it's not a primary source, but I was just enthralled by this guy's life, and no one knows about him.
Yeah.
He defeated 3 of Mehmet the Conqueror's armies. Like he's
way, in my opinion, he's cooler than Vlad the Impaler.
yeah, oh, way cooler, way cooler. And but people have heard of Vlad the Impaler.
Yeah.
People have not ever heard of Skanderbeg, right? Yeah, and it's like he's like an absolute hero of Christendom. Like the Pope would encourage him to fight on and stuff like that. No, he was. Oh, I can't wait to read this book. Oh this is gonna be beautiful. I'm happy. I wonder if it's the same translator or the same publisher as the guy who did the first one. Oh, that was Create Space. Oh, so it's just self-published. But no, oh man,
it's the same. Like it looks like the guy who did the. Let's see. Well, the editor is the same as the translator of the last one, so I bet it's the same people.
In fact, I had some email correspondence with the guy who did the editor, that David Hazafluke, who is a guy who lives in Albania. Man, if you get a chance, you got to go to Albania. There's such nice people there. And they got really good values there, like because they're technically it's Eastern Europe, not the West, but they're uncorrupted by the West. Like they're untouched by the Western corruption there, and so it's really refreshing. Like there's like like if you talk to Albanians who come here, they like complain about all the degeneracy there, and
yeah,
but there's zero Western influence there. You walk downtown Tirana, and there's like there's now there are some sketchy parts of Albania, the back mountain area of Albania, where I've actually been. It's where they are if you've ever seen Taken. And I told my Albanian friend this, and he laughs. He tells all his Albanian friends that he knows a Canadian who's been to that part of Albania. Because it's, well, last question. Have you got any projects you're currently working on?
Yeah, so on the channel, so I just uploaded a live stream on the anti-Nicene, so there's pre-Nicene church fathers on divorce and remarriage. I went through everyone that I knew about that wrote about it and went through all their quotes on screen. And I plan to do post-Nicene up through Justinian Latin fathers and hopefully the Greek ones as well relatively soon. So that's kind of like the main couple videos in the future that I'm thinking of uploading. So that's the main project. And I actually have a ton of content. I have like a 200-page like paper on divorce and remarriage. So we'll see what happens with that.
Okay. I might have some sources for you on that involving Emperor Leo VI.
Yes, I think you sent me them.
Oh, I did?
Yeah, you sent me some, but I can ask again just to make sure I have them all.
Okay, from like how he changed it and the patriarch opposed him.
Yes.
And of course the emperor won, that's ironic because all 4 of his marriages are valid according to the Catholic view, because his wife's died. That's what gets left out. His wife's died.
Yeah.
They didn't. It's not like he divorced them, and like the modern view. But all right, I will. So go follow him on X. His X is Papist Reply Guy. On YouTube, he's Spoken Through Leo, and I will. I'll let you go, Alexander, and happy Independence Day to you, to your family, and to all the Americans who watch this channel.
Thank you, and happy belated Independence Day to you as well.
Thank you. All right. Bye, guys. God bless.